about 6, 8 months before. And he'd had some stomach issues. The last time I told him, he said, no, I ain't doing good. I said, Jimmy, I know you ain't doing good. He said, but, you know, God's got that situation. And he said, I'm sure I ain't missing Lena. You know, you could tell he was grieved himself. I'm afraid he grieved himself. But you know, he was the only one left, and they moved to Maryville, Tennessee, and all he had was the friends that was around him. He had no family up there. All his family's gone. But you know, even in his situation, the Lord was with him. I was able to speak to him. He said he was ready to go, and the Lord had his heart. So, as far as I'm concerned, him and Lenny walking in glory today. You know, we talk about the widow. Her difficult circumstances gave her a way to flood of her tears. Over time, she would have no more tears to shed over her miserable plight. Her weeping would come to an end, and so would her hope. Her blank, empty stares would reflect the despair in her heart. You know, it's like a situation you had. Or let's say you're crying over the youngest. We prayed over the youngest, and the youngest is, you know, just tears you up. Mama's over there just crying. And, you know, when Mama cries, we all cry. You know, I feel like when Mama crying, it made me want to cry. You know, it breaks my heart when I see my mama cry. But you know, some people get so miserable at the time. You ever been to a point that the tears is gone? You cried all you can cry. Life's still not getting better. And you get into it's almost like you're in a different state of mind. You know. Have y'all ever experienced anything like that?
Oh, yeah.
Just cried and cried and cried till you just can't cry no more. You know, we ain't got to cry. If we'll go ahead and give it to the Lord and let Him handle it, you know, just turn it over and give it all to God.
That's right.
And let God handle these things. You know, some people, especially the old widows, I think of Miss Lenny. And we all know how Miss Lenny passed. We ain't going to get into that. But I know one thing. I give Miss Lenny a dog one time. And this, Lord, I don't know why you tell me to talk about dogs, but she said, I want you to bring them all up here. I'm like, okay, Miss Lenny, so I had 14 puppies. So I threw them all in the back of the truck. And she picked out the one that would come to her. That was the meanest dog that thing growed up, and I don't know how people got to her. Well, that dog was so mean. He would get after you. He didn't even recognize me. Miss Lenny kind of stayed off into the woods a little bit, it seemed like. But you know what? She had God and that dog. And she loved that dog. And she loved her Lord. But I went in her house and she had pictures of all the people there. I got to see her ex-husband, or her husband that passed. And boy, Miss Lenny was something else back in the day. Boy, she was a pretty woman. Them high cheekbones and all. But I miss Miss Lenny. I love that woman. What about people who suffer with hunger? You know, Job mentioned a hungry orphan who showed up in his life. Seeing that the aching hunger in the little boy's face stirred his heart. He couldn't endure the notion of eating his meager meal while the hungry boy watched. Today, folks in our world continue to suffer because they don't have enough food to eat. From children who go to bed hungry at night to senior adults whose income won't allow for groceries as well as medicine. Hunger torments helpless individuals. Their needs for nourishing meals beckons believers to help them. You know, hunger, that's a big thing in our world today. I thank God that He allowed states and communities to have this food where you can go and pick up these boxes. You know, it's really helped my mom and dad out. Matter of fact, it's helped me out from it because they get so much. She winds up, Mama takes it and she shares it with some of her people. She feels like that's a little ministry for her. She wants to feed somebody else. She wants to bless somebody else. And that's such a great thing. And if you know anybody that is hungry, somebody that's sick or sheltered or just don't have nobody, please let me know. We'll make sure they get something to eat. And people, here you go, people who lack reliable family ties. How many of y'all got a bunch of people that's really your family that you really can count on?
Amen.
I'm telling you, when you got good family that you can count on, that's as good as golden bank. I'm telling you, that's better than anything in this world. But when you got family that, as long as out of sight, out of mind, it's hard. I'm dealing with some of that now. Out of sight, out of mind. It's okay. It's okay. I still love them youngins. One day they get older, then I can sit back and tell them how much of the time they really did miss. But anyhow, I had to give that to God. That's another thing too. You got to give them up. You got to give them youngins up to the Lord too. You got to give them sons and daughters that's got them grandbabies. You got to give them up too. I don't know about y'all, my youngins, sometimes I have to shake my head. So, you know, when we don't have that reliable family, it's hard. You know, widows, children that's hungry, they don't, the reason they are is because their families, the people that's in their lives, are not taken care of. What about people who live without the basic essentials? You know, Job encountered a poverty-stricken man who did not have enough clothes. The man's lack of a cloak had become an issue of life and death for him. Without a cloak, he had no protection from the torturing sunlight and relentless heat during the day. And when the sun set, he had to suffer through the frigid nights without a cloak to keep him warm. You know, I also thank God for churches and people that have coat dryers. My aunt, she's so tickled. You know, she stays in Troutville, Virginia, right above Roanoke, and it's cold weather. It's snow up there now. And their church had a coat dryer. And boy, she got into that. She had to run it, pick her up, and bring her down here for Daddy's mama's anniversary. She had to take me in the living room to see the coats that she had. We don't wear coats like that around here. I ain't never seen one that thick. It was so heavy, I tried to put it on. It was like, I felt like a snowman. And it was a high dollar, not a Bass Pro Shop, but it was one of them Eddie Bauer coats, one of them big, thick rascals. But she was so tickled. Now how they were going to send them to Montana. I said, well, and what about around here? She said, I was asking about that. And you know, there's a bigger need in our community sometimes for people out there right now cold. People ain't got nothing. Thank God that for churches that have the little giveaways like we do. We've blessed a lot of people that's come in and took home clothes to wear. They've had something. Clothing continues to be a real-time need that helpless people cannot meet for themselves. God's people who follow Job's example want to provide them with clothing as well as other basic essentials. You know, we underscore the sincerity of our walk with Jesus by our determination to care for people who can't help themselves. When following Jesus becomes a priority for us, let's read it again. When following Jesus becomes a priority number one for us, we put Him before everything, We express it by caring for people who need us. Like I say, when we follow Jesus, then we'll have a heart like him. You know, I keep saying, and I say this in a kind of a joking way, that we're probably the only church around here that's had a string of heart problems. I mean, regular medical heart problems. But I think, I really truly think that God has got a plan in each and every one of us. Yes. Where he's fixed my heart, he softened it. I told Cindy, I said, I know what he did. When she took my heart out and put it on the table, before she stuck it back in, or maybe before she started working on it, she probably picked it up with the water hose and sprayed the nasty out of it. You hear me? Spray the evil and the nasty out of it, the meanness. My heart's not been the same, y'all. They cleaned out the dirty of me and left God in it, thank God. I'm just thankful for what he's done for me and my wife, and for each and every one of y'all that's had situations. I'm thankful for Nancy, what she's been through. She's been through more than any of us. But Lord have mercy, what a testimony she has. Well, she can look up and let me tell you what I went through. Biggest testimony you ever had. All right, Job 31, 21 through 23. If I have lifted up my hand against the fatherless when I saw my help in the gate, then let my arm fall from my shoulder blade, and my arm be broken from the bone. For destruction from God was terror to me, and by reason of his highness I could not endure. Job stood before a child who didn't have a father at the city gate. The city gate functioned as something like a courtroom. Job happened to be one of the city leaders who was responsible for passing judgment at that time. Individuals who had issues with others came to Job and the other leaders in order to seek justice. In the face of the fatherless child who had been brought before the city gate tribunal, Job observed the child's helplessness. The child's mother might have been standing nearby, and she was just as powerless. So here you are, you got a young man, a child, that's kind of out there. But then he looks back at mama and notices mama's out there too. We got to pray for them mamas. And we all know mamas have a tough time raising these children. Daddies, we do our best, that's all I'm going to say. If it weren't for good mama, some of us would have some rotten children. I probably would. I made sure my second wife, I would make sure she could raise me. And when Justin found out what she could really do, he was like, Daddy.
You love you.
No, son. I know what I was doing. Perhaps this boy who had brought trouble upon himself, or maybe he had been victimized by heartless criminals who had used him to commit their cruel crimes. Either way, he was now standing or kneeling before Job with no one in authority to plead his case for him. Job couldn't raise his hand against the boy. His conviction about justice would not allow him to mistreat the boy who appeared before him. He vowed that if he raised his hand to cast judgment on the boy, he would call for his body to be mutilated in a ghastly fashion. That he wanted his shoulder to be wrenched off his back and his arm to be twisted off his body. Man, such mutilation of his body would serve a beneficial purpose. He would never be able to raise his hand and mistreat another helpless person ever again. Put yourself in Job's place. Imagine that you're looking into the eyes of the powerless individual who's bound before you. Would you raise your hand? What if your colleagues, family or members or friends urge you to join them by giving in to their opinion? What if they just talked you into it? That peer pressure. You know, not everybody don't be on the same page. Some of your closest confidants and friends, y'all can't get on the same page. I had a meeting the other day, and there were 6 of us. And they said, how are we going to do a conflict? If there's 6 of us, I said, we ain't going to have. We all grown men right here, we'll vote on it. What if we got a tie? We're going to flip a coin. And that was it. And win or lose, we're all going to come together and roll on. You know? So you know, a lot of times you have the best interest of people's heart, but you got to be careful with people that hang around, because they'll try their best. If they're not, especially if they're not living right, if they're not living right, they'll try their best to talk you out of that. Don't you give that person $20. First thing comes out, you get that man $20, you're going to go to the beer store and get a bottle or liquor. He's going to lay up drunk on that $20. Or he's going to buy him some crack and smoke it up. God said,